Support for today's episode comes from Goalie ACV Gummies. They're a great way to incorporate apple cider vinegar into your daily routine, and best of all, they're delicious. Trust me, I was so tired of the bitter ACV shot every morning and completely made the switch, so they're totally Boonie approved. And as a Boonie Breakdown listener, you can receive 10% off your purchase by using the code Boonie Breakdown. Details on how to purchase can be found in the show notes and on thebooниebreakdown.com. Hey y'all, it's your girl Boonie, and you're listening to the Boonie Breakdown podcast, your source for all things responsible and ratchet. Welcome to episode 186 of the Boonie Breakdown podcast. I am excited for our guest this week. Our guest is none other than Dr. Shemeka Thorpe. She is a sex researcher, and her goal is to change the narrative around Black sexology to one that is more sex positive instead of deficit based. And what I love about it is that she thinks we should have conversations that normalize and remove generational taboos so that Black women can have healthier and happier sex lives. And guys, this episode was so dope. I think I advocate so much for Black women in particular to take ownership of their sexuality and pleasure in their sexual escapades. But we do have a conversation around those who might be experiencing some type of physical pain in sexual intercourse. We definitely talk about generational sex shame and how we all can play a part in changing the narrative and the framework about sex with adolescents, especially our Black female youth. So I am excited for this conversation. Be sure to stick around. Before we go further into the episode, I do want to note that after my conversation with Dr. Thorpe, we will be doing another Boonie confessional. So you want to stick around for that. It will be after the conversation with Dr. Thorpe. We're going to go right into my pick of the week. I've been doing a lot of TV watching right now. I'm not even going to lie. But I did decide, at first I had no interest in checking out Vacation Friends on Hulu, but I decided to check it out. And it was actually really good with Lil Rel and Yvonne Orji and John Cena. And so I did read that they're getting a sequel. So if you just want something, you need to take your mind off something. It is just really fun, silly, great laugh out loud moments. It was really nice to just put it on. I just put my phone away from me and just sat there and watched nonsense and laughed. So and I've also been trying to just really support things of Black people on these streaming sites so we can get more of it. And so if you're looking for something, be sure to check out Vacation Friends over on Hulu. That is my pick of the week.
Housekeeping. Housekeeping.
Come back later, please.
Housekeeping.
Not now.
All right, this week's housekeeping feedback from episode 185 with our Boonie Breakdown All-Star Shamika of Sexual Essentials. I am so happy that you guys enjoyed the episode. So many of you were so happy to have her back on the podcast. I got quite a few messages this week about the episode. One in particular said, "Boonie, oh my God, I didn't know how much I needed this episode. I've definitely been playing myself in the bedroom with several of my sexual partners. It is time for me to reclaim my sexuality and my own power and pleasure and show them niggas how this pussy works." So thank you so much for sending in that. If you have not listened, please go back and check out episode 185. Show me how this pussy works with Shamika of Sexual Essentials. I'm so glad that you guys enjoyed, because sometimes I get nervous about inviting certain guests back, but I do feel like there are some all-stars just even based off of the response, the number of listens, how you guys engage with me after the show. And so all of that feedback is so critical for me to make sure that I'm giving you guys stuff that you want to listen to. Because sometimes I know I hop in my rabbit holes and I do what I want to do because it is my shit. But I do this for you guys. So please be sure to leave me all of that feedback. All right. Also, and you guys know we have a poppin' Patreon. We're firming up the details for our live event for September, but those will be dropping this week for Patreon gang. It'll go public later in the week. But I'm excited. I think we're skewing ratchet again this week this month for our Patreon live event. And so if you would like to join in our group chat, if you would like to get extra Would You Rather Wednesday questions, then you can pay $3 is our lowest membership over on patreon.com/the Boonie Breakdown. We appreciate all of the support and we have a good time. So I look forward to you guys joining Patreon gang. Also, if you're like, you know what, Boonie, the budget is tight, but I still want to support you. You know what you can do? You can leave a 5-star review over in the podcast app if you listen on any Apple device. It's very easy. If you're already following us there, then you have to search the Boonie Breakdown. You scroll down where it says write a review. You click that, you hit 5 stars. You could type some words, bam, you're done. And you've helped me out more than you even know. And it's free and it takes you 30 seconds to do it. So I appreciate you guys doing that. If you're like, I don't have an Apple device, I'm listening on my Droid, you can do the same thing over on our Facebook page and hit 5-star review over at facebook.com/the Boonie Breakdown. If you want to follow us on other places across the web, you can do that on Instagram and TikTok at the Boonie Breakdown. You can do it on Pinterest at the Boonie Breakdown. You can follow us over on Twitter at Boonie Breakdown. And that is all the places we are. I appreciate it when you retweet, when you share, you put it in your Insta story, you screenshot while your player, while you're listening to the episode. You can tag us. You can use the hashtag Boonie Breakdown. You can use the hashtag PODIN, PODIN. It helps me get the word out to a larger audience when you guys use your own social capital to let your friends know, your friends, frenemies, social media lurkers know about the Boonie Breakdown. And I appreciate you guys so very much. So that is it for me. So let's get ready to break it down. Hey guys, it's your girl Boonie, and I'm excited for this episode. I just shared this with our guest, Dr. Shemeka Thorpe, but I have had a good run of Black sexologists and sex researchers on the podcast. And I was looking, it was this top 10 list. And there's only 3 elusive people who I've not had on. And so now we have 2 more after today's guest. So I would like to welcome Dr. Shemeka Thorpe to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, my audience is mostly Black women. So I usually only have Black women as guests. A rare occasion there's a Black man, but it's usually Black women here. Mm-hmm. I want to first get started. How did you I always ask this question. How did you find yourself in this space and becoming a sex researcher?
Yeah. So I got involved in research really early on. So I would say like in my undergraduate career. And then I was doing like maternal and child health. So really looking at maternal attachment with Black moms. And then switched over to sex. So, right, like went from attachment to sex. But I've always been interested in adolescent sexuality. I led a teen pregnancy prevention program back in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I knew that I wanted to stay in the research world because that's what I was passionate about. But I do still have a strong connection to the community. And so I see that a lot of the work that I do in the community informs my research, and my research also informs what then we go out and do in the community. So I definitely just, saw some gaps in things that I was reading, and I was tired of reading a lot of research on HIV prevention, although it's important, on HIV prevention and STI prevention and pregnancy prevention. I was like, well, Black women is more of us than that, right? So let's explore other things about our sexuality. And so that's where my research comes into play.
Gotcha. So what exactly is your doctorate in for the audience?
Yeah, it's in community health education.
Community health education. Okay. I know I was explaining to you, the audience here is primarily Black women. So again, if you're new listening to this episode, welcome, but this space is purposely created for Black women. But we welcome, you can listen, but I don't want no nasty grams. I always say that. I created this platform because I do like to focus and provide so much information for Black women to advocate for their pleasure. It's just so interesting when you have these conversations of women who are 40, 45, never masturbated, never had orgasms, and it blows my mind. Yeah. But one conversation I have not had on this platform is about what if you're having a sexual experience, but you're experiencing pain or discomfort? And I never talk about that when I was going through the many topics we've discussed here. And how, like, I want to back it up because for someone, they may not even know that they're experiencing pain or discomfort or sex should not hurt. So what are signs and symptoms of someone who could be experiencing pain during sex?
Yeah, so people describe it different ways. So I did a study with just Black women and, about sexual pain and sexual pleasure, as well as sexual anxiety. And, some people describe it as a burning sensation or a stinging or a throbbing. And most of the time it's during like penetrative intercourse, or whether that be vaginal or anal. But it's something that is reoccurring, right? So not like that one time where you have pain with a partner for the first time and then you never experience it again, but like that reoccurring pain that you can't get rid of, or maybe you try to switch positions, but the pain is still there. Yeah. And some people experience that only during sexual intercourse. Some people experience it like right before or after. And so it's really important that if you notice that this is not your normal amount of pain that you would feel like on typical insertion, then maybe there's something going on, especially if it's lingering. And so, either talking to your partners about it or talking to your medical provider is important. But we know as Black women, sometimes medical providers can be dismissive. So they don't always listen to us. And so, trying to figure out what that looks like to find a provider that, one, listens, but two, also exploring pelvic floor therapy. Okay. So that's always an option as well that I feel like a lot of Black women aren't referred over to because medical providers don't know enough about it, one. And two, they most likely don't even know it exists. And there's tons of pelvic floor therapists. I have actually a resource on my Instagram and on my website where people can find a list of pelvic floor therapists of color.
So what does pelvic floor therapy look like? Because I've heard this before, but I've never gone. I don't even know if I know anybody, but maybe they are, and we just aren't talking about it. So.
Yeah. So I actually went to a pelvic floor therapist, but I went for something that wasn't pelvic floor related. So that was so interesting within itself. But it looks different for different people because there's different treatment plans. So for some people, it could just be exercises. For some people, they're given dilators, which kind of look like sex toys to kind of just strengthen their pelvic floor muscles, but also loosen them and help them relax. So it's just different treatment plans based on what your body needs or whatever your pain diagnosis is, because there's different types of pain disorders.
Gotcha. And so how on average, how many or what's the percentage of women who experience some type of pain or discomfort during sex?
Yeah, the most recent thing I read was 20% at last sexual encounter. So the last time you had sex, 20% of women say that it was painful. And then overall in your lifetime, 65% of women have experienced painful sex. Whether that painful sex was only with one partner or whether that painful sex was something that has lasted their lifetime since their first sexual debut varies, but it's 60%.
Wow. Yeah. I do think because it's not something that we talk about. I can even think about my own friend circles and we kiki ooh, he did this. It was fun, but I can't ever recall where someone was ooh, this one time, or I was with someone and I can't. And I was thinking about it as I was prepping for this episode, but now I'm just my own natural curiosity is, is this another topic that people are just avoiding or some people think sex is supposed to hurt?
Yep. That's what I was about to say.
That's their norm. It hurts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just about to say, I don't know if it's a conversation we're avoiding versus a societal expectation, right? You expect it to be painful, based on what you hear in, music and songs. So if they ain't beating it up, they ain't doing it right. So it's oh, okay, well, I feel a little pain. Must have been doing something right. It's
look, you just said something. I wasn't even planning on go here. Let's go. It is okay because when you say that, the language in which you talk about it, he was in my guts. He beat the pussy up. Why is it so aggressive? And
Right. Like, hold up. It's not a boxing ring. Like,
it's not a boxing ring. Look. But I mean, when you just said that, I'm like, almost every song, it's in a hook, it's in a chorus. It was some Chris Brown song that's out right now, but he's like singing the hook. I don't even think it's his song. And I was like, well, I like got a nice little vibe. I'm like, oh, this is it. But then I was listening to the words the other day and I was like, this song is terrible. Like, he was just like, if you got a flat ass, I'll still beat it down. And I was like, so to your point, when you're constantly ingesting these messages, then yeah.
And if no one's ever told you that it shouldn't be painful, or, you know, if you don't feel like you have a safe space to talk to your partners, because I think sometimes that's the thing. Like, a lot of times people feel so much anxiety about talking to their partner about like, hey, I'm experiencing pain, or they feel bad, right? Like, because they don't want to stop them from having pleasure or, you know, having an orgasm because they had to stop having sex. And so these are things that women constantly talk about, like, you know, I don't want to prevent them from receiving pleasure. So I just sit there and, you know, I tolerate it. Or, you know, they don't want to use lube because it feels unnatural to use lube. And so, you know, providers aren't even prescribing or telling them to, you don't have to prescribe it, but telling them to use lube. And so if it's one of those things where lube isn't talked about as something that is normal and natural and as something that can enhance pleasure, then it becomes something that feels like, oh, well, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. And I think too, what I heard you just say in that, in the conversations around sex, women don't focus on themselves. They're thinking, and we do this in other areas of life too, where we're thinking about everyone else before ourselves. And so we're suffering and not enjoying something we should be enjoying because we're so nervous or worried about our partner, their ego, their feelings, etc.
Yeah.
And I do think, you know, it starts at a young age, right? I even think back to, I feel like I was blessed in the sense that my mom was a little bit more realistic in her approach to the birds and the bees talk. But she never, I don't think anyone flat out said while I was growing up, like, sex feels good. Like it feels good. It was the conversation of protect yourself. Don't get pregnant. Don't be out here in these streets. It was that conversation, but it was never like, oh, it's going to feel good. Right. Yeah. And I know I was doing research for this episode, and it was saying how so many Black female adolescents don't believe or don't think sex should be pleasurable.
Yeah.
And that broke my heart.
Yeah.
What kind of conversations can we have with younger women or younger Black women about reshaping what their expectations of sex are about?
I think first destroying the myth that like your first time that you have sex should be painful, because I think that sets you up, right? Like the first time you have sex, that's a question I always get from like middle schoolers and high school.
Does it hurt?
Yeah, like, does it hurt? It's like a question box filled with does it hurt question, which hurts me, you know, but, you know, so I think destroying that myth that it has to hurt or it should hurt the first time. Like, I think it's a should, right? Like they think that it should hurt or something wasn't done right. Or how do I know that like I've lost my virginity? You know, that's what they want to know, you know, which is a whole like social construct within itself. But, you know, I think having that conversation about that it shouldn't be painful and things that they can do to make it less painful, I think is important. I think also exploring why people want to have sex. Like, I don't think we ask teenagers enough, like, why do you want to have sex? Other than like maybe social pressure or things like that. Like, why do you want to? And for some teenagers, it is because it feels good. Like they know, they're like, no, that feels good. That's why I'm engaging in it. But because we don't have those conversations about like their motivations to engage in sexual intercourse, we don't give them the space to be like, oh, well, I don't know. Or, oh, well, you know, I heard such and such say that it felt good. Okay, let's talk about that more. Right. So I think just having the space to openly talk about, one, why they want to engage in it, and two, kind of destroying that myth or just like a hard fact they believe that sex should be painful, especially the first time that they have it.
Yeah, I definitely, it made me reminisce back. And that was definitely the conversation with my friend circle. I think in my close friend circle, I might have been like the last one to lose my virginity. And so I was already like, and I also think about the social pressure that you said, right? Like the reason I lost, and I've said this before in another episode, but like the reason that I lost my virginity, it was totally for, I mean, talk about setting up bad habits, like in retrospect, but it was only because I didn't want my boyfriend at the time to turn 18 and be a virgin still. And
Mm.
so it was like 2 weeks before his birthday or something. And I'm like, all right, we can have sex.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, that was literally the push over off the cliff. And I just think about that whole space, just saying that out loud now. Like I would never want a young girl that I was mentoring to say that to me for that to be their reason, even though I would go into this whole thing about virginity being a social construct and all those things there, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't want their sole reason to be for the person that they're with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, right now we see that people are having sex later. So like teens are having sex later than they were like decades ago. So, some people are referring to it as like a sex recession where people aren't having sex as much or as early. So, I think hopefully because people are having it later, then they will be able to have it for pleasure. And so I think we have to set up the expectations that it should be pleasurable. I grew up reading Zane books, so I thought it should be pleasurable. Now. Okay. At the same time, like I have friends telling me like, oh, it should be painful. Like this should feel like this. I'm like, I don't know. This ain't what it say in the Zane book. Like the librarian knew me. Okay. So,
That's funny.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think it's just two messages that I received. Mm-hmm. And so I think that a lot of times people get those mixed messages. And I think that's good to counteract kind of some of those messages about pain.
Yeah. I definitely, I do remember like it hurt. But again, it was that first time. Mm-hmm. I think the second time was less. And then by the third or fourth time, I was like, oh, all right. Yeah. I get why people do this now. But yeah, no, I do. I think it's interesting to hear you say that people are having sex later. And I do mentor young girls here in Baltimore. And some of the conversations that I hear them having, I feel like they're so far advanced than anywhere I was in my teen years in high school. And I also just feel like the culture is shifting a bit, right? Things are more open. We're talking about words. I mean, they're exploring options for their sexuality and gender identity that I'm just learning about in my 30s. And they're like, oh, I'm non-binary, but I like people. And I'm just like, I'm pansexual. And I'm like, I just literally learned what that meant like 4 years ago. And so I feel like it's like the scale is shifted. And so like, how can people our age or even older, where we're about to go there, can like shape a conversation that's healthy and still give good sound advice, but it's fitting to where the younger generation is today?
I think listen to them, step one, right? Like I think there's a lot of intergenerational learning that has to occur. And I think a lot of times older people don't listen to younger people.
Say it again.
They see themselves as being like the wiser people, but they can teach you a lot, just like you were just talking about the teens that you mentor. They can teach older generations a lot. And so I think one thing that's really important is being open and honest about your own experiences. I think too often people feel like they have to like be in this authority role, like, well, no, I didn't do any of this, or no, like I wouldn't do that. And it's like, no, talk about your sexual experiences and talk about, what it was like for you and things that you wish you had done differently, or, listen to them when they're expressing, whether it be a sexual identity, a gender identity, whatever, like listen to that and learn and read. But I think that's a part of, I think another issue is the fact that we don't have a lot of sexual health programming for older people. So that's a whole thing within itself, right? Like, it's like, okay, you got out of high school or you went to college, you got out of college, good luck. Like, what happens after that? Like, so I think that's another issue within itself is that, there has to be programs, because a lot of times people didn't learn. Like my mom, she didn't have sex ed growing up. Like that wasn't a thing for her. Like schools were just being integrated when she was in 5th grade. Like the last thing they were worried about was sex ed.
Like that's the plight of being Black. You can never really focus on pleasure. Like we would just get in mixed schools.
Like now all of a sudden I got white people in my schools. I'm not worried about sex ed right now. So it's like, she didn't receive that. And so there needs to be a program for her generation. So I think
it's so funny, especially with the older generation. And I'm going to take even older, like my grandparents. Yeah. And so my grandmother has been deceased for about 10 years. And my grandfather lived in a senior building. And he was probably like one of 10 single elderly men in this building, right? So the block was hot for him.
Yeah.
And I go, and in their like community room in the building, they had the biggest bowl of condoms I'd ever seen. And so I was just like, oh my God. But I loved it. But at the same time, I was like, no.
Yeah.
And the lady at the building was like, it's because she's like, you got to think, these elderly people, they've either been with someone for a gazillion years. And she was like, now you have, some older men in here who don't have companions. And she's like, it's, statistically, they get escorts or prostitutes. And they don't know what a condom is. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so much. But it makes total sense. And I remember telling my mom, I was like, look, and my uncle, I am not having a conversation with Pop about condoms. Like I will, y'all need to step up and do that. I will not be the one to do that.
Yeah. I mean, and I remember when I was teaching undergraduate students, I had them make like sexual health programs for people that were 70 and up. Like, what would that look like if you had a program at a retirement home? Because, right now, especially in Florida, like they have high rates of STIs within retirement homes because people are just, having sex with each other. They've never used condoms before because what's that? And so they're just, giving STIs to each other, or a lot of times, older people are dating younger people thanks to dating apps, and so we see that STIs are getting spread that way too.
Yeah, I mean, it just never even crossed my mind. Like, and then that's what she said. She was like, elderly over 70, 75, one of the highest, populations of new infections. And I'm like, but it makes sense. They have no idea. It's like a whole new world for them. So yes. And I also think, so you have these intergenerational, I think was the term you said earlier. And so if you have, our parents did the best that they could do, right? And their parents did the best that they could do. But even though I feel like Black people, the attitudes towards sexual pleasure and sexual behaviors are evolving, maybe a little slow, but they are evolving. We got to do generalizations now. Them old Black people, they're not moving. And so they have these beliefs, boys will be boys, girls, you can't. But then girls, you're too fast if you wear a short skirt or you have red fingernails or you do these things. And it's like, here's the more pressure put on the girl, but guys get to run out here and be anything, everything, do everything. And it's not fair. It's not fair. So with these conversations, like if someone's listening to this and they're like, yep, girls can't be too fast. Like, what would you say to that person to help them change and make that shift in their mindset?
I think for me, the first question I always ask is like, one, who did that to you? Right? Like you're learning that because someone has done that to you. Like I remember my grandma was like, if you can't wear red nail polish or
wear red nail polish.
You red lipstick, and like Lord forbid if you do it on a Sunday, right? Like then you're like a super whore. And so and I was like, well, where did that come from? And she was like, my mom always said that. Like it's always someone else that has said it. And so that definitely made you feel like some type of way when you heard someone else say it. And so thinking about that and what does that mean? And what would it look like? Even how their life would be different if they didn't have those messages, one, and also like how they would feel more sexually liberated, right?
Yeah.
I don't feel like they feel that way. Now some do, don't get me wrong now. Okay. But some, I'm like, no, I don't think you feel that way. Like, I don't think you were able to come into your full sexual self because there were so many barriers and stereotypes and rules that you felt like you had to follow as a Black woman?
It's so many rules. And I think on your Instagram page, you had like a generational sex shame. And I do feel like that is something that just, it's like a avalanche. Like it just keeps building and building with the next generation. And I do think it takes like my mom, I always point to her in this, because this is one space that I'll give my mom all of the rounds of applause, because my grandmother did say some pretty hurtful things to her because she thought she was being promiscuous. And my mom took the approach like, I will never say these things to you. I'm not going to limit you. Now, my mom didn't say, I think she equipped me enough to make the decision for myself. It wasn't like, if you do this before this date, you're a whore, you're all these things. But she did not say it like, I don't recall her being like, it feels good, but I do recall her being like, when you decide, please let me know, all that stuff. Right. And it's just crazy what generational shame will do, especially with sex. And I do watch how even though maybe I didn't hear my grandmother say those things to my mother, I know what my grandmother thought. Right. And so for the longest time, some of those things were seeped in my brain that shaped how I moved sexually. And I just look back like, damn, I wasted good years. But like, damn you, Granny. Right. But like, what like, I hear you said earlier about listening. What are other things? What would you tell somebody who is even still struggling with things that were put on them from previous generations that still have a hold on them, that they can't fully enjoy sex, or they still have hangups about certain sexual acts, etc.?
Yeah, I think one thing that's super helpful is like journaling about it. So I know that I believe Afrosexology has some like worksheets related to like overcoming sexual shame, but also just like the sexual liberation in general. So those things are helpful. I think also making a list of things that you wish you would have done if you didn't feel so much shame, right?
Oh, I'm gonna do that myself.
Yeah, like what are some things you wish, looking back, like I wish I would have done that, or I wish I would have done that. And then how can you do that now, right? Like how do we get to the place where you can do that now? I think that's important. One book I always recommend is Pussy Prayers. I really love that book.
Okay, I'm getting it, because you're the third person in like 2 weeks who said this.
Just get the book. Yeah.
Okay,
Pussy
I'm
Prayers.
getting it.
Their second book is called Please. And Pleasure Activism is a good book too, that kind of touches on some of those shame pieces, but also, just different ways we can advocate for our own pleasure, and things that might be barriers to that. What does pleasure look like even in a non-sexual way? I think is important. I think if we can tap into non-sexual pleasure without feeling shame, because oftentimes it feels shameful to do something good for yourself.
And especially as Black women, it's like we got to carry the whole load. So,
right.
Oh, how dare I give myself a massage, get myself a massage,
So start looking at that, right? Like those non-sexual things and where you receive pleasure from non-sexual things, and then move into that sexual realm. But I always think journaling is super helpful with that.
Yeah. Journaling is like one of my favorite things. And it's something I used to beat myself up when I didn't do it consistently. Like I do have moments where I will journal every day. Yeah. Every day. And sometimes it's not long. It's just, I'm grateful for blah, blah, blah. And that's all I got today. And that's all I put. And then I'll go through these and I hate it, because then when I go back and read my journal, I'll be like, oh, what happened in these 4 months where I wasn't journaling? I hate it. But I'm going to actually do that one, because I was saying that the other day. Like I'm sharing all my business with y'all today, and it's okay, because we cool. But I even look back with when I said I wasted all those years, like in my mind, right, the person that I was trying to stay a good girl, right? I hate that. Yeah. Like that's one thing that still irks me about, childhood influence. So I wanted to stay a good girl. So for a minute, I was the everything but girl, right? I wasn't going to go there because I was still trying to save myself for this particular person because we were going to get married. And so you're the only person I've had sex with. But I was doing everything but, right. Yeah. And so, it's like all that wasted time. That wasted time.
Me and my friends were just talking about that yesterday. Like, if we could go back, to undergrad days, what would we do? Because we're seeing all the kids going back now. I call them kids; they ain't really kids, but like going back now, we're like, oh, what would we do different?
Look, I don't know how old you are, but if I could go back 20 years ago, okay, I'm a little older than you. I'm 36, going on 37. So if I could go back 20 years, listen, and go back to undergrad,
okay.
Listen, Linda.
Yeah. We said we didn't respect our good knees back then. So they go now.
I try to do something now. I'm like, crack, crack, crack.
Right.
I'm like, no, I'm trying to be sexy. But no, I totally like this. It is so interesting too when you, even though it's like you always hear the thing, Black people are not monolithic. Mm-hmm. But then we have such deeply shared experiences, right? That somebody can say this. So someone was saying a saying that their grandma used to say about fast girls. I'm like, oh my God, my aunt said that, right? Like, and so it's like, it started somewhere, right? And it's just a shame that just these sayings that have been passed on from people now we don't even know who made them, still have a hold on Black women and the way we move, sexually. It's very daunting when you think about it.
Dr. Natasha Crook, she did a research study on like how older Black women feel like they're protecting younger Black women's sexuality. And one thing that came out of that was like calling them fast and how that's being protective, or shaming them for wearing like certain types of clothing that are too revealing because they should cover their bodies, like they should cover their bodies because they're trying to protect them. Right. Yeah. So I think it does more harm than good, but I know that it is very much in a way of like, oh, I'm trying to be protective because, they just feel like they don't trust the men in the world. And two, it's another situation where it's like someone did this for me, so I'm going to do this for you. And I remember when I was reading that manuscript, one of the participants said that, she kept getting called a fast girl so much that she wanted to know how could she become one. Like, since I'm being called that, well, let me just
go live the life, right?
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, like I get that, and so I think of how it can have two different outcomes, but overall, I think it does do more harm than good.
Yeah. And you hit on something when you said the distrust of men. And I always think of this one, I used to talk about this particular scenario, like Black girls growing up in the house, you're in your house and you're wearing maybe a tank top and some little shorts.
Yeah.
And you're told, go cover up, it's men in the house.
Yep.
That one as an adult burns me up because it's like, so what you're telling me is men cannot be trusted around younger girls and I'm going to say girls and younger women to just wear a tank top and shorts in their own home. And so then it's like, well, who is in the home? Generally, it's family.
Right.
And so that even that message that Black women can't even be comfortable in their own home around family members, that bothers me so much. Like, and you hear that so often. Go cover up, it's men in the house.
Yeah. I definitely heard that growing up. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure every Black woman listening to this is like sitting here shaking their head like, yep. And so just that message alone is like, well, you never so why isn't the behavior being corrected upon the man? Like if you're saying they can't control themselves, how come, because that's what you're implying, but if they see some scantily clad woman, no matter the age, they're going to respond.
Right. Yeah.
It's terrible. I hate it. Now I'm sitting here thinking of all of the things I was talking to one of my mentees and just to see how comfortable she felt disclosing some of the things that was happening in her college days. I'm like, I'm so jealous. But just how comfortable she was just this. And I'm like, I could never, when I was 19 or 20 years old, think of any person in their 30s or 40s that I would call up and speak to about my rendezvous like this.
Yeah.
But it made me feel good.
Right.
It made me feel happy.
Feel good, right? Like you're a safe space to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So that would definitely make you feel good. I remember like when I went off to college, it was a thing of like being in a relationship, right? Like usually people go off to college and they get in relationships, not to like marry, but that's the hope, you know? And I was like, let's go ahead and just nip that in the bud. I was like, I'm not doing, I don't think I got a relationship until like my senior year of college. Because I was like, I really just want to explore like what it means to be Shamika, but also just what it means to be like sexual in the world. And so I remember like I was like a hardcore pass like until June, until my junior year.
Yeah. No, if that is my one wish. I do think if I ever got a genie in a bottle, I would ask to go back and relive my senior year in high school through my sophomore year in college. Like just one more, like, let's do that one little patch over. Isn't that funny? Like me and my friends were literally having the same conversation. And I'm just like, what a waste that was. But here we are. All right, look, Dr. Thorpe, we are at the part where we do the breakdown.
Okay.
I am going to say one word, and you can say the first thing that comes to mind. It could be a phrase, another word, a sound, whatever.
Okay.
All right. First one, Black women.
Powerful.
Pleasure.
Ooh, erotic.
Ooh. Advocacy.
Talking.
Love.
Passion.
Community.
Cohesive.
Sex.
Good sex.
And last one, Kevin Samuels.
Oh God. That's it. There's no other word.
Perfect.
That was perfect. Yep.
Literally perfect. So Dr. Thorpe, yes, I'm calling you Dr. Thorpe because you got your credentials. So you will be called that here. If you could tell everyone where they can find you on the internet, on social media, plug anything you want to plug, it's your time.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Shameka. Shameka's Shemeka. Also, my website is drshamika.com. If you go to my website and you subscribe, you get a free download on 6 ways to make sex more pleasurable. Also, on my website, there is a list of the pelvic floor therapists that I mentioned earlier, as well as books. So I am a bibliophile. I love to read. So I have a list of Black feminism, Black sexuality, and pleasure books on my website. And if you feel like gifting me a book, my Amazon book wish list is on my Instagram in the link.
Awesome. I will be sure to link to Dr. Thorpe's website and social media in the show notes and on the booniebreakdown.com. Go ahead and send her a book.
Please do.
Gifts
are my love language.
Oh, I love it. Yes. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I had a great time.
I like talking to smart people.
Oh.
So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Who had been saying that? Who said that?
So before we wrap up this week's episode, we're here for another confession. All right. This one is titled, This Is My Confession. I have not been a monogamous woman since age 18. And when I was 17 years old, my boyfriend went away to college and I found myself in 2 relationships after meeting an older person while he was away. That lasted for 2 years, 2 whole boyfriends for 2 years. What I learned about myself is that I could love 2 people, desire 2 people, and never skip a beat with both. Fast forward 20 years, and I've never been in a monogamous relationship since. I've tried to explain to every man that I've been in a relationship with how I feel, but I often get ignored, so I've developed a norm for my life. I am now married, and I would like to keep a side and a possible, like puzzle pieces, sis. I piece together what I'm looking for in a relationship. My thing with monogamy is on any given day, no matter your highs, your lows, your desires, how can there be one person to ride that wave? I give my spouse enough space to explore the same. I just wish we could have an open and honest conversation about our reality. But a man's ego is nothing to be played with. In my household, I never skip a beat. I have big love. This is my confession. Ooh. You know what? I really like this because even though I still practice monogamy, the more I read, the more I listen to podcasts, the more I follow people who practice any type of poly lifestyle, I always admire them and I commend them because I do think monogamy is the society norm, at least in Western society, right? And so I commend anyone who is able to build and craft and live the life that they want that makes them happy. And so, sis, I tip my hat to you for finding the balance and finding at a young age what you like and what makes you happy and having all your pieces to your puzzle. So peace be with you, my sister, and thank you for your confession. All right, that is it for this week's episode, guys. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Shemeka Thorpe, for stopping by and imparting all of her knowledge. Be sure to follow her across social media. Do not forget to support our sponsors if you're looking for some new vitamins or to replace your nasty apple cider vinegar shot. Be sure to use the code Boonie Breakdown. The link is in the show notes to get your own Goli gummies. And that is it. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to listen and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or any apps you listen to your favorites on. Don't forget to leave those 5-star reviews too. Please, please, please. You might just hear your review on a future episode. Follow us on all social media. Share the episode with those you love, those you don't love, those you fucking hate. I don't make these pretty images for nothing, okay? Share these reels. I'm making reels. Share them. Have a dope-ass week. Stay healthy, safe, and sane. Thank you for listening. And remember, the ratchet in me always honors the ratchet in you. Namaste. Until next time.